We've also started saving, I've created a YouTube channel. I've started saving some of our webinars onto that YouTube channel. So I'll get that link out right away too. Anyhow, happy Monday morning. Last Monday of April. Can't believe it's already the end of April. Where did this month go? We are so thrilled to have Mike Green join us again today from altView. And so I'm just gonna turn it right over to Mike, and then after Mike presents, we'll go into our sharing session, and Amanda and Lisa will take that over. So welcome, Mike, and take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Can we all hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Wonderful, excellent. Just like to make sure technology is never always consistent, I would say. So good morning. I'm just going to start up my presentation here. Come on, PowerPoint. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so before we get started, I do want to recognize that we're all on treaty land. Some of us are on Treaty 6, some will be on Treaty 7, potentially even Treaties 10 and 4. So it's important that we all recognize the importance of being treaty people, and as well what our responsibilities are as treaty people. So within the altView Foundation, because we work so closely with particularly rural communities and communities across Alberta, we do like to have a particular focus on Indigenous rights, Indigenous inclusion, and understanding and empathy. So we do like to focus during the land acknowledgement on what it takes to be treaty people and really what our responsibilities are. And so I like to do that by talking about what our commitments are as an organization. So we're committed to the decolonization of our work, the continued advocacy for our Indigenous relatives, and to move through the world in a good way. So we're really all about creating more inclusion for Indigenous peoples and understanding, particularly as we, as our organization talks about too, as LGBTQ plus people, that a lot of the perspectives that we come to the table with are one particular colonial idea of what it means to be queer and or trans. But in fact, there were many understandings long before we reached these lands from Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island. So it's important to recognize as we're going through this presentation today that a lot of the things that we're talking about may look a little bit different for Indigenous peoples and cultures and communities. So let's keep that in mind as we go through, and let's get started thinking about some things that we can do in our community. So first, I want to give everyone a little bit of an update as to who we are. Many of you may be seeing us for the first time. So who is the altView Foundation? So we're a nonprofit actually from the Strathcona County region of Alberta. So we were formed by youth who really had the same story that a lot of queer and trans youth have across not just Alberta, but across really everywhere. And that is that they came from smaller communities, and when they turned 18, they did what many queer and trans folks do. They left Stewart Park for Edmonton. They wanted to feel more connected. They wanted to feel safer, like they belonged. So they started our organization when they realized that that was a trend, that was a stereotype, that folks who come from smaller communities feel like they have to leave. So our organization is really dedicated to answering the question, well, why is that the case? And why is that a stereotype? And can that change? So a lot of our work is really around creating safer spaces, not just in urban and the major urban centers in the province, but specifically in smaller communities in rural Alberta as well. We don't think that safety and inclusion is something just for Edmonton and Calgary. It should apply for every corner of our province. So our organization is really dedicated to that. So who am I? This is a lovely depiction of what I think I look like. As you can note, I'm not wearing glasses in that particular self-portrait. So if it's not accurate, please don't tell me I'm wrong. When I look at it through my blurry eyes, my blurry vision in the morning, it looks very much like me, so please don't tell me I'm wrong. I am the executive director of altView. My pronouns are he and him as well. And I've been a member of altView since 2014. I've been volunteering for quite some time. That led to a position within the organization that eventually led to ED. My background is in psych, sociology, and communications. So a lot of that work really funneling directly into the work I do now. And my big focus is on collaboration, education, and empathy. Really, that's the focus of our whole organization, is to help people no matter where they are, both physically as well as in their learning journey, to find their best path. So we're all about connection, empathy, understanding, and education. And my contact is very simply mike@altview.ca because I don't like complicated email addresses. So today, we're going to focus specifically on how we can develop local programs. So when I spoke last month, a few folks reached out to me, and I got some feedback from Melissa that there was a desire for folks to learn more about how they can start programming right where they are. So whether that be a Case Alliance or some other similar type of program, how can we get those off of the ground? What are some useful tips? How do we do this? So we'll talk about that. And as well, we'll talk about what I'm going to euphemistically say is navigating friction. So we as well had some feedback from folks who come from areas where there isn't a lot of, we'll say, buy-in when it comes to acceptance and inclusion work. So how do we navigate that? How can we start to change that conversation? And who are our allies in our community that can help make that work happen? So I'm going to try and present for a little bit less than a half hour or so, because I really want to hear from all of you, because every community is going to be as unique as a fingerprint. You're going to have different questions and more specifics that I can specify in my presentation. So I do want to make some space at the end for Q&A. As always, I'll be monitoring the chat as well. So if you have some questions as we go through, please don't hesitate to ask, especially if I'm going a little bit quickly, but we will have a lot of time at the end for discussion and Q&A, because I really want to hear from you too. So the first segment that we'll talk about is really the Gay Alliance piece. So what does a community GSA even look like? How do we start one? And what sorts of activities are appropriate for that type of program, or another type of other type of programs that are similar to that? So first, let's go into what does a community GSA even look like? So it's mostly the same as in schools. So they're safe spaces for queer and trans youth, questioning youth and their allies to gather without fear of bullying, to connect and learn from each other. So that's really the general gist of what a GSA is. They may take a lot of different structures. They may look a little bit different, but that's really at their core what they're all about. And as long as that's the core and the spirit and the soul of the program, then you're doing fine. Structurally speaking, though, community GSAs function exactly as they do in schools. They're youth-directed, focused on connection and wellness, and should be unique to each group. So a GSA or a similar program is as unique as a fingerprint. So it's always dedicated to what the youth needs are in the community. And so because of that, each one's going to look a little bit more different. The names will be different, the ways they meet will be different, the activities they do will be different. There's gonna be slight variations in every community. So if you are developing a program or you already have, and it doesn't necessarily look the exact same as somebody else's, that's gonna be completely okay, because you're responding to the needs in your community first and foremost. In general, though, there are 4 main types of GSAs slash 2S LGBTQ plus youth groups, and these can overlap as well. So a singular program or a group can cover multiple of these, but these are the general categories that we see. And the first is mental health supports for those who are struggling. They need connection, they need resources, they're looking for counseling potentially, they're looking for that support from the local community and from their peers as well. In some cases, just a safe space. So for some, it's a safe place to be themselves, to start exploring things, to really just be themselves in a place where they don't have to explain that. That is actually very transformative for a lot of youth, where they don't have to defend themselves. They don't have to explain who they are all the time. It can be really transformative to be in that space where they don't have to do that work. Then there's visibility and awareness. Some groups are actually very focused on changing things around them. So they're looking at pushing for change. They're looking at doing activities that lead to change. They're doing activities more publicly. And then there's the last piece, which is simply just social. They're looking for social connection, fun things to do, fun places to hang out, people to hang out and discuss their favorite things or play games with. So really those are the 4 main types of groups that we would see. And like I mentioned, one group can actually fulfill a lot of these. So in conjunction with the city of Fort Saskatchewan, we operate Rainbow Alliance, which is a community GSA in Fort Saskatchewan. And it really covers all 4 of these. So we do different elements that really respond to each one of these different types of themes within youth groups. So in some cases, it's just about social connection. Sometimes we engage them to do letter campaigns or to present to mayor and council if they want to, or to do projects that will be seen by the wider community to increase visibility. In some cases, just providing that safe space from bullies at school or families that don't understand. And in some cases, we're connecting them to mental health resources. So with that one group, we're really fulfilling all of these things. So your group could match one, all of the above, or just some. That's really up to your group. And it really is all about meeting kiddos where they are and really responding to what their needs are. So how do we do this? So that I talked a little bit about the generalities, but how do we actually make this happen? First, select your champion to lead the GSA. It could be you, it could be somebody else within your organization. And it's always advantageous to have that second co-champion as well. It's really useful to have multiple adults being part of the structure of that space to provide opportunities to break away if somebody needs more support. It's not just one person running everything. Because sometimes with GSAs and similar programs, you're going to have youth feeling safe. And when they feel safe, there could be disclosures and that sort of work. So having that second person to be your co-champion is going to be probably to your advantage. Determine how you want to structure things. Is it for ages 12 to 14 with 15 to 18 separate? Are they together? How do you want to do that? Is it only for older teens? Are you focusing more on younger? It really depends on what you're seeing within your community. So is it strictly a GSA or a more loose diversity club focused on marginalized identities across a spectrum and looking at otherness? How frequently do you meet and where and when do you do it? During the pandemic, how do you accommodate cohorts? Is that best worked out with your admin? How do you want to structure that? That structure is always going to be again, very unique to your group, and it's going to be focused on where the group needs are. So with, again, to use Fort Saskatchewan GSA as a good example, our group is open for 13 right through to 18, but because of the needs of the community, we tend to see youth who are 14 to 16 most consistently. So that's typically what we're seeing, but different groups and different communities are going to have different needs. So communicate about your GSA, speak to schools in particular. In those early sessions, if you can have attendees create posters for around the community, trying to get your name out there as best you can, particularly in spaces that youth typically go to. So in every community is going to be a little bit different. It could be the library in one community or a movie theater or a bowling alley or any number of different places it could be. Trying to reach those kiddos wherever you can. Obviously, your schools are going to be an ally in that. So reaching out to guidance counselors, particularly in those schools where the school itself can't support a GSA. So we don't talk about this very much, but within particularly rural schools, there is a couple of things that can sort of conspire to make a GSA within a school not particularly feasible. So one might be a small population within the school, perceptions of it being unsafe. In some cases, kiddos won't want to join a GSA within their school because they're worried about being seen or being outed. So in particular, in communities like that, schools may not be able to feasibly sustain a GSA. We have a number of schools that we work with who only have 3 or 4 kiddos who come, even though the teachers involved know that there are many more students who could be they could find benefit from the GSA. So in those instances, a community GSA might be a better or safer option for them. So in those instances, communicating to those schools, they'll have those students who they know will want to be there and they can connect you to them. In your first sessions, lead the students in conversation about what they really want to see, both in terms of activities and discussions, those sorts of things, as well as what they need to feel safe. So I typically, for the first several sessions, will have either flip chart paper or whiteboard or what have you, where I literally will just leave the questions on the board of what do you want to see in this space and what do you need to feel safe? And we have an open discussion about that. It could be as simple as people introducing themselves with their pronouns. It could be as complex as I need more complex things in terms of activity. So I'm looking for more learning, can you help me understand who I am? A lot of things like that. So there may be a lot of loaded suggestions from that, but it will help you sort of refine what your group looks like and what the needs are. So in some cases, it may not be work that you can do yourself on your own. And that's why you have resources like altView to be able to turn to if you need to help you connect to resources, connect you to things like, hey, Michael, they really want someone to come and present on this because it's really outside my scope. Can you please help? Stuff like that will really help because you'll understand from the early sessions what they're looking for, and therefore you can strategize what you need to do to find those resources. And then as well, in particular, this is very important. Consider how parental permission may play a role in your program. We may need to get forms signed for our programs, but how do we make that safe for youth who may have fears, particularly around being outed or being perceived as something because of the group? So that was an issue with Rainbow Alliance in Fort Saskatchewan. So we, in the verbiage in the form, just simply softened it a little bit. We weren't overly explicit with the scope and the specific things that we would be doing. We just simply we described it as a group for all youth, for those who are allied as well. We sort of discussed it in more of a loose way, so that when we were talking to parents, it could simply just be that their kiddo was a supporter who was looking for a place where they feel safe, that sort of thing. So you may have to consider that piece and work that out with the youth as well. So what do they need to feel safe in regards to what's communicated to home? How do we get forms signed? What information are they concerned about? And sort of both recognizing what you need to do for your role, but also what their needs are in terms of safety, and trying to reconcile the two. So what sorts of activities are appropriate for a GSA or Sumo program? We get asked this all the time because people oftentimes draw a blank when they're looking for activities. Luckily, I am an endless fountain of ideas for programs because I've been doing this for 6 years now. So I've seen a great deal of different activities that work really well. So first and foremost is art activities. They're always the hugest hit. These kiddos are often very creative and looking for ways to express themselves. So art themed things are going to be very important for them. So larger themed art projects like community bulletin board displays. We did one for one school that was hearts in different colors for flag themes for Valentine's Day, where they made a community bulletin board that said love is love. And so every heart had a different pride flag. So there was the rainbow flag, the trans flag, and different flags for different identities to communicate that all people and all identities are worthy of love, which is a really cool art project that was also used as a community display too. Button making is always very popular. They love making buttons. I love that kiddos these days are very 1990s punk, in that I grew up with jean jackets just covered in buttons, and I love that they're doing that now too. It's like 30 years later and they're super into it. So they love buttons. They get to make pronoun pins or flag pins or fun cartoons. A lot of kiddos are very artistic, and they love that way of being able to wear their creativity literally on their sleeve. So as well, button making can create pronoun pins where you can have conversations about respecting pronouns. I left that at school, both in the community at large as well as within the group. Looking at reading queer and trans themed books or short stories and then discussing it with them. You can also do that with short stories from short videos from YouTube, or using that to cover specific discussion topics and then opening it up for discussion. As well, obviously, cookies and cupcakes are going to be a huge hit. It's both creative and delicious. Kiddos love any sort of cooking activity, particularly if you have the capacity to enable them to make the food themselves. Not every group is going to have a functioning kitchen to work with, but in those areas where you can, giving them opportunities to develop their skills is always very useful. A lot of queer and trans kiddos worry about independence when they're older. So for a lot of them, providing them with soft skills or even low-level life skills is also a really great way of preparing them for life. A lot of our kiddos will, despite our best efforts, still move to the city to be away from family, to be away from what they perceive as being an oppressive environment. So for a lot of those kids, providing them the opportunity to develop their skills that'll benefit them when and if they're on their own is actually a really great sort of springboard for them. So it's one thing that we've encountered a lot is youth looking for life skills. So we try to couch it in fun things instead of just being like, we're going to learn about taxes today. We try to make it a little bit more fun. So in particular, cooking, budgeting, grocery skills, food security, that sort of thing. We try to couch that in more fun activities. So consider establishing a pen pal relationship with other GSAs and have your kiddos write letters or create cards to help connect them with youth in other communities, particularly in smaller GSAs or smaller programs where there may only be 6 or 7 or 8 kids. It can be very useful to connect them with other similar programs in other communities. For example, in Fort Saskatchewan, we actually connected our kiddos to youth in Australia. So we didn't even limit ourselves just to Alberta. So we connected them to youth in Australia to be able to give them exposure to other youth who are both very different, but also very similar. So it's other GSA kiddos, so other trans and queer youth. It's actually very useful for them to sort of get a gauge for what it's like in other places and learn from their peers in other spots as well. Because for a lot of our kiddos, they're working with a lens of the world that's relatively limited. So giving them a window into queerness and transness elsewhere is very powerful. This one is really important. So physical activities can be really powerful. Queer and trans youth and their allies are often very disconnected in terms of their relationship to physical activities because of bad experiences in places like gym class or team sports, from body issues, etc. So reestablishing a connection to physical activity in spaces that are safe can be really transformative. So we've done a lot of this. So games outside, hikes, geocaching, in places where we can do it, all body swims. So a lot of queer and trans youth groups will try to organize all body swims, because a lot of particularly trans and gender non-conforming youth have very insecure relationships with their bodies for a lot of very valid reasons. So giving them a place where their body is valid and it's not going to be scrutinized or judged, where they can swim, where they can wear a bathing suit and they're not going to be judged, is very powerful. So Camp Firefly, which many of us have heard about, they do an all body swim every single year for specifically that reason, because a lot of queer and trans kiddos, they deny themselves access to physical activity because of their relationship to it. So wherever you can, even if it's simple, something as simple as like going and petting goats, going to a petting zoo, a lot of places will have things like that. So just taking them places and doing things outside and getting them active. A lot of times our queer and trans youth are very used to being on computers or on the internet or isolated in other ways. So getting them connected to the outside, even if they complain at first, they will take to it like ducks to water. Consider guest presenters. So especially for rural communities, you may not have a lot of easy access to things right around you, but you can still find organizations to come and present on specific topics, even to do activities, even if it's not just presenting, even if it's leading kiddos in activities, whether in person or virtual. That can really help connect those kiddos to a wider community that they may feel very isolated and distanced from, particularly in small town Alberta. They know that these organizations exist, but they don't necessarily connect with them because they feel like it's, oh, that's for the city kids. They don't reach out to me. They don't know me. So bringing in those organizations can also connect those kiddos to resources beyond just yourself. So bringing in, for example, folks like Skipping Stone from the Calgary region. They focus specifically on trans and non-binary kiddos and adults as well. So connecting them with that organization might enable them to be connected to more resources even beyond your community. So community activities could as well be safe for your group. So bake sales, awareness booths, queer proms, etc. They can be great long-term planned events that the kiddos can help you out with. And as well, it gives shy and introverted kiddos options to participate without being public, which is always a big consideration. So when you're thinking about doing more community-wide activities, it's important to remember that not every youth in your program is going to feel safe to engage with that. So they won't want to be public. They won't want to be out per se. So for instance, there's even adults who feel that way. So I'm currently chairing the Strathcona County Pride Committee, and we have some trans adults who are on the committee who don't want to do any of the public facing work, but they want to contribute to the work on the backside. So you may have a lot of kiddos who are shy or introverted. So coming up with strategies to get them engaged, whether it's, hey, do you want to design the posters for this? Or, hey, do you want to help me with baking this cake that's going to go to this function? That sort of thing that makes them involved without necessarily needing to be public. So that's the one caveat to community activities, is that it's important to always find ways and avenues for our shy and introverted kiddos to participate without being public. And as well, I want to link here the ATA because they have a GSA guide for schools that's going to be really helpful for a lot of folks, even if they're not in schools, when they're creating GSAs or a similar program. It's a 65-page document that covers everything. So it covers everything from neo-pronouns like Z and Zer and what those mean and what are those as a whole chart, all the way up to activities and ways of running your GSA. So there's going to be a lot of aspects in there that's going to be very school specific. So they have some things from the School Act that's not going to apply to a community GSA, but it is, I think, very illustrative for folks who are working in community to see what the schools are tasked with, because you're going to be replicating a lot of the similar work. So a lot of the same lessons will apply. So I thought I'd link it there because in a half-hour presentation, I can only cover so much, and they're going to cover a lot in detail there. So a lot of the detail that I might be glossing over in this presentation will be very much present in that particular document. So please give it a check. Oh, and as well, I should probably mention, you're going to be receiving a copy of this presentation. So if you don't want to write down that long URL, that's okay. You're going to receive a link to this. You can just copy and paste. So let's now turn away from more, we'll say, wholesome things, and we'll talk more about supporting our colleagues. So how can we encourage colleagues to learn more about US LGBTQ inclusion? How do we best address a colleague who is facing challenges, we'll say, in creating a more inclusive space? And who are our allies in our community? So we're going to talk in broad strokes, and then during our conversation, maybe I'll answer some of the more specific questions, because I know that you're all probably facing some pushback. You're probably facing some fears or challenges in so far as how do we do this, and are there people in our community who are making that work harder? So let's talk about that. So how can we encourage our colleagues to learn more about inclusion? So advocate for 2S LGBTQ learning and staff meetings. So meetings like this, community meetings, wherever you are, if you are in a position to be able to say, hey, I've taken some training courses, I've been bumping into some of this work. Here's some key skills that I've learned. Here's some things that I think might help, that sort of work. So how has that worked for you? Can you speak to that during a meeting? Can you challenge folks like, hey, this is the thing that is out there. Have you ever considered this? So if you're able to suggest PD options, books, websites, videos, etc., that have been beneficial for you. So as you're learning things, remember that you can leave breadcrumbs behind you. So if you're learning things for the first time, a lot of your colleagues may just be a few months behind you, and they may just need to learn the way you learned. So wherever you're finding things that help you, and you can communicate that to your colleagues in that way. Hey, I actually struggled with this for a while. What really tripped me up was this thing, and here's a book that I read that really helped me figure it out. Like that sort of thing might help to encourage people, because it can be very easy to say, why don't these folks learn? Why don't they know this? But to be fair, most of us did not know this starting off. So for a lot of us, it takes some work and it takes some time. So providing them with the opportunities to do that work will be very helpful. Oh, and there's a question in the chat. Do I have any links to recommended videos that I can share? There's some. So there's some that I like, but they're more for younger kiddos. So there's Queer Kids Stuff is a really great YouTube channel. It focuses very much on the most foundational, like the type of thing you probably see on like the Big Comfy Couch. Like it's very younger youth skewed, but they do things in a very accessible way that opens up the door for conversation. There's also a YouTube channel called Y Gender, so the letter Y Gender. It's out of Australia, and they do a lot of really interesting videos about transness, gender nonconformity, that sort of thing. So what I'll do is maybe I'll compose a list of links for you. I don't have a one offhand, but I'll construct one for you, and I'll in the email to Melissa giving this presentation, much like I did with the book recommendations last time, I will create a little curated list. So highlight your successes in your work where appropriate. So this is a key point of encouragement. Encouraging people when they've done wrong isn't the only way. Highlight successes as well. So like when things are going on, particularly when you're in group meetings like this, being able to say, hey, our community did this really amazing thing and it was received like this. Sometimes that can be sort of a great instructional tool where it's like, hey, we did this thing. It was very, very, very useful for our community. Our kiddos found it very helpful. The family community found it very helpful. Maybe you should try this. And then my recommendation is to be that person. And I think everyone knows who that person is. It's the human who has rainbow flags, 2S LGBTQ plus books in your shelves, leading literature all over the staff lounge, championing inclusion bulletin board, etc. That loud person who just says, hey, gay stuff over here. The more you're established as that safe contact in your community, colleagues are going to feel comfortable coming to you with questions. So I often say, don't fear being the rainbow clown if you need to be, because really loudly signaling that you're the safe person can bring people to you. So it'll be like a beacon that draws people to you, like, hey, that person learned and they're from this town too. Maybe I can learn through them. That works really well. That said, obviously, it's at your own discretion. In some communities, that might also make you the target for a lot of criticism or scrutiny or pushback, or if you're someone who reads the comments online, it could lead to some comments online. So obviously, it's at your discretion, but where possible, be that person, be the really outspoken, safe person in the community. It can be a lonely task to start. But within time, you're going to find allies really flocking to you. So when we first started our work in the city of Fort Saskatchewan, I'll probably draw back on Fort Sask a lot because we've done a lot of great work there over the years. There was a particular worker within FCSS who was the big champion within the community. And she definitely had a lot of support, but it took some time for that support to become visible. But over the course of the first year or two that we were working with the city, that one person became 4, became 5, became a whole community at large. So it can feel very lonely at first to be that human who is really outspoken in their support and really driven and purposeful in their support. But over time, you will not be alone. You'll draw to you a lot of those supports you're looking for. And in particular, it'll encourage your colleagues around you to get on board or be the odd man out. There is a degree of social pressure here in that no one wants to be the last person in the pool when it comes to being safe and inclusive. It really just takes that first person to jump in and sort of belly flop into the pool and say it's safe, everyone come in, and then everyone will start joining in. So being that person can be lonely at first and in some cases not overly comfortable, but it can certainly lead to a great deal of change in your community. So what we saw in Fort Saskatchewan was that person took on that work at first and they were supported by us. And over the course of time, that support really turned into a community of support that is now self-sustaining. So even though we still work in the city of Fort Saskatchewan quite closely, a lot of the work that's happening there isn't even altView derived. So it's actually, we're supporting that work the community itself is developing. So that first person started a much larger conversation, which led to a lot more support beyond just the queer and trans specific supports coming from the community. So when possible, be that loud person. So how can we best address a colleague who is facing, we'll say, some struggles in creating a more inclusive space? So I'm going to use a little bit of euphemisms here because I don't like just saying this person's terrible, because I try to leave a bit of room for empathy wherever possible. Not everyone is terrible. Sometimes they just don't know, particularly in smaller communities. They don't have access or exposure. So they don't understand that what they're doing is harmful, and they don't understand that what they're doing is exclusive instead of inclusive. So where we can, call people in where appropriate. So I always use the phrase call people in rather than call them out because of the perspective. So when we're calling people out, it's really the accusation. It's saying you are this. So where possible, call them in, saying things like, hey, did you know that your behavior was this? Hey, did you recognize that what you said was a little bit homophobic? Hey, did you realize that when you aren't making space for they, them pronouns, you're making a lot of people feel uncomfortable or excluded? So a great rule of thumb is to remember how we feel when we're being challenged on things that we've said and done. Remember that we should be intentional, and that we should challenge but not confront. That's a really interesting finesse point. So when I guess a challenge I would say is, think about when you have felt defensive when you've been called out for something. And then also consider when you actually decided to change on something that you were wrong about. What led you to deciding to change and commit to that change? Was it when someone said you were wrong, or was it when someone supported you in understanding why you were wrong and then gave you the opportunity to change? So that's sort of the way that I like to phrase this, is that it's important to be challenging, not confrontational. So when we confront somebody, their defenses go up, they double down. We're much less likely to create change with that human. So wherever possible, challenge them in the ways in which they're acting, not who they are. So the more that we're challenging behaviors and not people, the more we're going to get some traction. In particular, in smaller communities, I've been doing work in small communities now for about 6 years. And I can tell you that from my personal experience, the more that I say things like, have you considered? Do you say things like that often in your presence? Do you know where to find support if you needed it? A lot of more nurturing questions rather than simply accusational questions gets a lot more traction. So giving space for people to be wrong and to express their fears, because in a lot of cases, what we're dealing with are people who sort of know that inclusion is important, but because they feel like they've missed the boat, or it's sort of left them behind, or they don't understand, they sort of just don't know where to start, and they don't know how to start, so they just don't. And they get defensive about that. So it's important to try to encourage them wherever possible, push wherever possible, but push in ways that create long-term change, that don't just feel good to say. I'm going to tell you very upfront, it feels really good to just say, you're being homophobic right now, and I don't like it. It can feel great, in fact, to really call out that behavior. But at the end of the day, if we're trying to create long-term change, we have to be considerate about how we go about that. I always call it the iron fist with a velvet glove. So we need to be firm, but also recognize that the people that we're trying to change are people too. So we may think they're homophobic or transphobic, they're making people unsafe, and that is probably true. But if we're going to change that dynamic, I think we need to figure out what our tactics are and how we're going to be very purposeful in how we challenge people. So when in doubt, remind colleagues about the responsibility of staff to provide a safe space for all. So the important thing here is that when we're dealing with municipalities, with counties, with other folks within our FCSS groups, we all have a responsibility to creating safety and supports for the community at large. Wherever possible, remind people that queer and trans folks are part of our community. Like, I think that seems really almost trite and obvious, but a lot of times people forget that. They'll sort of dismiss things as being, oh, we don't have that here, or we don't have many of those folks here, or why would we do that? They're just going to leave the city anyway. That's more city people stuff. There's a lot of excuses, honestly, that we hear. I did a lot of work in mostly east of the two is what I would say. We do a lot of work east of the two, and I was in Delburn, which is just outside of Red Deerish, down toward that region. And that's something that we heard from the community was that, well, we don't really have any of these people here. So why are we doing this? And the reality is, well, how many people are in your community? Even a town of 100 are likely to have at least 5 to 10 people who are queer and or trans, give or take, given our stats. So looking at that picture, the answer isn't we don't have queer and trans people here. The answer is, why don't we see them? And I think that that's a really great pivot point for a lot of folks. It's a great way to leave more challenging colleagues with a question that they can consider. Why don't we see people who are out here? Why do people leave our community? Why is that happening? And can we change it? That, I think, oftentimes really is the question that leads people to change, is that question of why. Why is it this way? Why don't we see people in our community that reflect this demographic? So whenever I've encountered principals, for instance, who have said, oh, well, it's an elementary school, we don't have queer or trans people here. My response is always the same. You don't see them, but they're here and they're going to eventually come out, and the world that they experience through you is going to shape what that world looks like for them in the future. So if you are creating a world where their identity is invisible, where talking about their identity is taboo, and where they're not safe, that's going to influence how they develop and how they view not just your community, but how they view people at large. So what are we doing to set our kiddos up for success, whether we see them or not? Which is actually kind of that critical piece, because a lot of times in communities, they don't want to act until they see the problem, but the very fact that they're not seeing the problem is the problem. So who are the allies in our community? This is actually very vital, is understanding. I actually had a conversation with somebody in a county literally last week where they said, I don't know who in my community is helping me with this. I don't know if anyone even is. I don't know who's going to be my support. I don't know where to turn. And so we had a really great conversation specifically about how to find allies in our community. So I imagine that a lot of you are probably thinking about that exact thing. So in general, most communities are going to have organizations and institutions that will be potential allies, and you try to move your community in a direction of safety and inclusion. So you're going to have those allies. They're just not visible at first. Like the metaphor I used before, the pool is there and everyone wants to jump in, but they're just waiting to see who jumps in first. So public libraries are always a very safe bet. They have a very specific mandate to be safe, open, and inclusive of all. And I call them the secret punk rock rebels of the inclusion world. So where people may think of organizations like altView when it comes to inclusion, or the Pride Centers, or resources like that, in fact, it's actually libraries. So libraries are very subversively inclusive. So they'll have like little displays for Pride in the smallest of towns. They'll have a whole they'll have people who literally know what books are queer and trans inclusive and will specifically seek them out to bring them in. And they'll very frequently stand up to the community at large. So in Camrose, they had their local library did some work for Pride, I want to say 2 years ago. And they did along their walkway, they did chalk that was different rainbow flags, different messages of support, and different encouraging words of inclusion. And they had some vandalism of that. And the response to the library was to simply do it again. So very frequently you're going to see the library being a very stalwart ally. They're kind of like honey badgers. They don't care. They really truly do not care about pushback. They will engage in the work of inclusion. They'll create the displays. They'll bring in drag queens to read to kids. And when they get pushback, they're going to say, so what? This is important for our community. This is educational. This hurts nobody. Get on board or get out. That's very much who they are. I would say reach out to your local libraries or libraries in your region for that support. They're very likely to be your first key ally. Similarly to them, Boys and Girls Clubs have as well inclusive mandates. They're changing their title. So actually this came out on Friday. So they're actually rebranding completely to be fully inclusive. So it's just going to be BGCs. They're removing the boys and girls component to include our non-binary kiddos. So they're very specifically inclusive, and they're going to know who in the community is at need, even if you probably will as well, but they'll often have kiddos who are connected to them specifically who could benefit from queer and trans inclusive programs, or they maybe even have the capacity to help you with that program itself. And then lastly, schools can also be a potential support. And if not the schools themselves, because sometimes we know that as best as we hope for schools being inclusive, not every administration is going to be vocally supportive, but there will be staff within those schools who are going to be very supportive, particularly in those schools where they can't get a GSA off of the ground or they've tried before and it's failed. Those teachers are still very engaged in making that happen, but maybe they'll be able to volunteer outside of the school to help make that happen, or at least connect their kids to you. So in a lot of cases, the school may not be the safest or most fertile soil to plant the seed of a GSA. We'll say in a very flowery language, pun intended, but they may be able to help you create that and lift it off the ground. So looking to your school contacts can be very important. So this leads us to more of a discussion point. I wanted to leave a lot of space for you to communicate to me what you're going to do. So I'll leave my information up on the screen, but I'm just going to switch back to be able to see your lovely faces. So I think, yeah, that's perfect. So maybe we'll go off mute if anyone wants to ask any questions or open up for discussion. I as well will be monitoring the chat too. So by all means, does anyone have any questions or anything that comes to mind from this presentation or from this work?
Well, Michael, I have to start off and say that I find this whole presentation really inspiring, and myself, I just feel super excited to get this off the ground, right? And know that maybe it's not as scary as I thought it was going to be. Originally, my first question for you is, do you go in here with an agenda? Well, after listening to you speak, to hear that it's just kind of this nice, easy breezy, free flow with the kiddos leading it and everything like that, just makes it seem a little bit less stressful. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think a lot of adults, I think it's our impulse, particularly those of us who come from any sort of programming background, it's our impulse to overplan and overstructure. Yeah. But with a GSA or a similar program, even if it's not specifically called a GSA, any sort of youth-based queer and trans programming, letting them set the tone and lead the way really solves a lot of the problems, because I understand exactly what that impulse is, because even from my perspective, when the pandemic hit, we thought we knew how to best approach the needs of youth, but then we realized within a couple of months, why don't we just listen to what their needs are and then just provide that? Because we thought we could if we just provide this structure, because we know from our training that they're going to have these triggers, are going to have this response to isolation. So if we do this, it'll directly address those needs. Whereas at the end of the day, they're more engaged and bought in when they feel as though they have some ownership. And when they have ownership, it's when they're actually contributing. So they're setting the rules, the pace, they're suggesting activities. In some cases, they're even leading the activities. So we're now at the point in Fort Saskatchewan where sometimes we're actually getting the kiddos to suggest an idea for an activity and then lead the group. We just buy the supplies for them. So we made stress balls about a month ago, and it was really, honestly, one of the kiddos said, I really want to make stress balls. I learned how to do this. I want to teach other kids. We were like, what do you need? And we bought them up the supplies for it. And the youth actually led the activity that week. We just brought the supplies. So sometimes the kiddos can take a lot of the work off of your hands. The one caveat to that though is I like to underline this point, is that the more safe your kids will feel with you. The more your work may not be the structure of the program, it might be more responding to the mental wellness component or connecting them to specific resources. So more often than not, that's what I find is that the adults that create these spaces, they think they need all of this structure. And then over the course of a few months, they realize, oh, I can actually like chill out a little bit. I can just let the kids set the pace. But then what they find when that happens is that very rapidly, when the kiddos have ownership over the space and they feel safe, they start disclosing. So a lot of the work becomes almost peer counseling work in a way. So that's sort of that one caveat where creating that structure with them will lead to you having to respond to a very separate piece. So you're not necessarily just programming the space, you're actually responding to their specific mental health needs too.
And you, with your groups, you meet weekly?
No, it depends on the group. So I would argue that the group will meet as often as it needs to meet. So some meet bi-weekly. So Rainbow Alliance in Fort Saskatchewan is every other week. But I also volunteer at a youth space in Fort Saskatchewan where I'm a peer support worker there. So our kiddos in that space, even though they're not so they come to Rainbow Alliance, but they'll also come to the youth space as well. So I see them every week, but the program itself is every bi-week. So it really depends on what the youth's needs are. So you'd ask that question of them, how frequently do you want to meet? For some kids, it might be weekly. But in some cases, you can provide alternate ways. If for whatever reason you don't have the capacity to run a weekly program, it could simply be that there is an online message board or a Discord or some sort of other outlet, because maybe it's not necessarily the space they need weekly, it's the connection they need weekly. So you may not need to run the program every week, but providing them a consistent space where they can meet. So that's one thing that we've done as well, is we actually created a community GSA Discord server. So that way the kiddos can chat even when they're not in the actual sessions. They can still connect, and we moderate the space to make sure it's all like safe for school and that sort of work. And that's a really great way of keeping them connected, even if the group itself doesn't physically meet, except for every other 2 weeks.
Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome. Is anyone experiencing any pushback in their community or any concerns when it comes to, I don't want to say specific things, we will keep names off of the record, obviously, but is there anything happening in your local communities that you maybe need some advice on, or even if you want to ask a more generalized question that could apply to you or other people, anything that may have to do with local pushback? Because I know that was a particular point within the feedback from last session.
Hey, Michael. I run a Hinton Youth Center over in Hinton there. We're ages 13 to 18, and we have been looking into starting some sort of alliance club. That was like pre-pandemic, but the pandemic kind of put everything on hold. But I was wondering, do you think that would be the kind of question I was wondering? Yeah, so like if that would be an appropriate place, like a youth center. It's a drop-in center after school. So would that be, I just didn't want to take away from the other youths or have the center labeled as directly like LGBTQ or anything like that. So you mentioned that you have like a different center that you drop in or that you peer support with. Do you so like they're two separate programs distinctly? But
yes, they are. Yeah, so they are. Though I will validate your concern in that the Bridge Wellness Hub for Youth in Fort Saskatchewan, that's the youth center that I volunteer at as well. It's also the space where Rainbow Alliance meets when we're able to meet in person. Right now, we're not, just because of the pandemic, but that's where we would typically meet in person. And when we could during the pandemic, we met there. And I will validate what you're saying in that the Bridge now has a sort of loose association with queerness and transness. It's not specifically, but a lot of the kiddos who come to the space are questioning or are oh wow, I'm really tripping over my R's today, but they are in fact out as queer or trans. So it sort of labels the space to a degree, but if anything, that's actually brought more youth to the center, generally speaking, not even just for Rainbow Alliance, but more people who are like, oh, well, if it's safe for the trans kids, it's gonna be safe for me too. It sort of like creates that, if that makes any sense, like where if it's safe for the most marginalized kids, then it's going to be safe for like a kid who's being bullied or what have you. So that can happen where the space may end up getting sort of rainbow tinted, we'll say, and that's okay. I always say that that's fine because most of those youth centers are really dedicated to supporting the youth who are most vulnerable, and queer trans youth almost entirely fit within that demographic of being most vulnerable. So yeah, when it comes to having the space, operating it in a generalized youth center is actually preferable. The reason why is because for a lot of kiddos, having it be in a space that isn't just queer or trans specific, that's why I always bring up libraries, because libraries don't have a stigma attached to them. Libraries are for everybody. So hosting a group in a library means that those kiddos who don't want to be outed or don't want to be seen going to the gay place have a way of being able to access that without it being necessarily connected to queerness or transness. So it's kind of like hiding the program inside a larger program. So I try to always suggest wherever we can, having our GSAs or community GSAs in spaces that are more generalized, because it will shield youth from that stigma or that perceived stigma, and it will also connect them with other resources. So when it comes to youth centers, we're going to have other mental health supports, we're going to have other types of programs that they can connect to. So they may come there for the GSA and then stay for something else. So when it comes to the Bridge Wellness Hub for Youth, we had youth who came for the GSA, but we have clinicians on site as well, and they started booking mental health appointments with a therapist. So like it was really great. So we connected them to other resources because they were already in that space. They warmed up to other supports and services in their community, it was a great 2-for-1. They had a safe space to hang out and have cookies and be gay, and then they had a nice counselor that they were able to form a relationship with and connect to. So wherever possible, we do try to advocate for having GSAs couched within existing youth spaces that are safe and more generalized, because that way there's less stigma and more connection to other resources.
Right. Cool. And so just can anyone start a GSA then, or like do we have to go through any sort of paperwork or no?
Nope. So your individual community may have specific, like if you're starting a program through an FCSS, there might be like specific bureaucratic pieces that you may have to do to register the program or what have you. But in general, GSAs can be started by anybody for anybody. So generally speaking, no, you don't have to do, there's no like governing board you have to apply to. I would love to sit on that governing board of the gays and be like, no, you can't have a GSA. But I would never say, I would say you can absolutely have a GSA. So by all means, like nobody, it doesn't have to be a queer or trans person who starts a GSA. In fact, it's actually more powerful if it's not. It's actually more powerful when Ally starts a GSA, because then it's the community jumping in to be able to support. It's not just like by and for the queer people in the community. That can help. That's not lacking in power, but certainly I think that it sort of sends a different message when it is the whole community supporting it, and it's a member of the allied community saying, no, this is what our community stands for, so we're going to be supporting this. So anyone can start one. There's no official process for starting one. There is in schools to a degree, but not outside of schools. Outside of schools, it's like the Wild West. You can just start a program if you want.
Okay, and just final question would be with regards to like the first program or getting people to attend, would you just throw out a poster and say like GSA, we're gonna like either get together outdoors or just something after COVID or whatnot, like and then do you think that they'd turn out for that LGBTQ? Like
yeah, so it'll depend on your local community. So in some cases, it might be good to get a read and maybe ask some kiddos that you're connected with, hey, do you think this would work? Because different kiddos are going to have different levels of comfortability with public facing stuff. So sometimes they'll see the poster and go, ooh, that's for me, but they won't warm up to it at first. So I always warn people, your first couple of meetings might be disappointing. Not because you're doing a bad job, just because the kids don't necessarily know to trust it yet. So always stick with it. When they see that it's consistent and safe, then they'll come. It's the same thing with schools. So don't think this is any different for the schools as well, because I've had guidance counselors who are amazing and they start their GSA and nobody shows up. And they're like, Michael, how did this happen? This is terrible. And the reality is you can do everything right and the kids won't, if they don't know it's safe, they may not connect to it at first. So just give it some time, be as public as you can, while also sending the message that you're going to be public, but also safe. Like you're being public with the promotion, but the actual meetings are going to be safe, and helping to communicate that, doing direct outreach where you can. So going in and specifically speaking to the schools if you can, because the posters are going to be good for awareness, but sometimes it may need to be communicated specifically to the youth what is safe about the program, because they may not know at first, right? But that's my general my general recommendation is to promote publicly and then communicate, I wouldn't say privately, semi-privately, more like less broad, like communicate directly to the kiddos what is safe about the program and how and what they should expect and what they can experience in the space.
Cool. Thank you very much.
You are welcome, my friend. And we do have some questions in the chat, so I'm just going to scroll back up and answer them. Perfect. So for Mickey, Riley FCSS has started an adult social support group centered in Riley, but for all Beaver County residents, and have had some pushback. It will be starting a community QSA in the summer or fall, and the adult group members are stoked to support it. Wonderful. Great work, Riley. Yeah, you may end up getting pushback from the community. It doesn't always feel great, but remember what that pushback really represents. It's people who aren't used to change and they're still warming up to it. I try not to be very judgmental of that because change is surprising for all of us. How many of us have had to reconcile change throughout the pandemic, right? And how we always respond perfectly emotionally, soundly, and respectfully. I certainly haven't. I've called people idiots more often than I think I have in the entire preceding 37 years of my life. So we want to always pretend that we're always compassionate, and we are mostly, but sometimes we need to give some compassion to folks who don't always quote unquote deserve it. So remember that pushback piece, have some compassion for those folks. They know not what they judged. And Rebecca had to get going. It was great to see them. So Amanda was going to ask if I could provide an example of a poster we have put out for advertising. Oh, absolutely. I could actually just send you them. I use Canva. I am not a graphic designer by any stretch. I can send you all. I've done them for schools and communities as well. Very, very simple. We try to keep it relatively simple. The where, the when, what to expect, and color. A lot of rainbows everywhere. Grab the eye, keep it simple. But I will share all those. I'll actually put that in the email as well to Melissa. And from Jenna, our FCSS department has hosted a gender diversity presentation with skipping stones. Yay! A couple years back. In advertising, we did find there to be some negative comments being posted on Facebook. It's always Facebook. It just further proves the presentation and conversations are necessary. Absolutely. Yes. So Facebook is a pit of filth. It's also very useful to communicate to people, but it is also kind of not great. So you're going to experience some pushback, particularly in smaller communities. Actually, even in Edmonton, we still see pushback in Edmonton too. So it's not even just a small community thing, but people in small communities feel more ownership. So they may feel more pressed to push back. But it is still important to forge through. Like you said, every time you do this work and you see that pushback, it actually just justifies the work you're doing. It really proves the point of why we're trying to do what we're doing. So we only have a minute or two left. Any other last questions or comments? As well, there was another comment that was in direct message to bring this information to support a greater inclusion within diversity policies within FCSS locations. Under boards of municipalities, do we have any recommendations? I would actually say the best person, yeah, Nikki, you do have to turn the comments off sometimes. So the best person to ask actually might even be Christy. So Christy Wall in Fort Saskatchewan, she is a part of FCSS there. She actually has specifically done this work. So she was one of the people I was speaking to earlier about someone who was an early champion who had to push the local community in a different direction, including FCSS and the city of Fort Saskatchewan. So she's a great resource when it comes to what that was like and the pushback that she got as part of her role, both from the community as well as within our organization a couple of times too. But my general sense is that it starts with education. So wherever possible, filtering in and layering in a bit more pressure on, hey, this is a thing that we can get some education around. We should really focus on that. So contact information for Christy, I believe, is Christy or K Wall, WAHL at fortsask.ca, if I'm not mistaken. And a question from Andrea. The acronym, so yeah, the acronym, I use 2S LGBTQ+, just because where we work in a lot of rural zones, a lot of folks that we encounter are Indigenous, and we put the 2S first as a way of, like, I guess verbally referring to our prioritization. So we put Indigenous peoples first because we're trying to center their needs first. So there is no official acronym. I will put that out there. There's no official acronym. The one that I use does not need to be the one that you use. It's just simply the one that our organization has sort of chomped onto. Yes, I can definitely type that in chat for you as well, Astrid. I will put it in here for you. So it's kwall at Fort Sask. And yes, I am someone who talks as I type. I apologize. Perfect. And I think that is everything from the chat. And that's the end of our Q&A time as well. I don't want to keep too much longer because it's time for your reflections moments. So if you have any more questions, please reach out directly. My contact information is directly right there on the screen for you. And like I said, in a day or two, you'll get a copy of this presentation as well as that list of video recommendations from YouTube and as well as some posters from some other things that I've done before when it comes to promoting GSAs. And Iron Fist with a Velvet Glove is the way I try to move through life firmly and resolutely, but always with a degree of compassion. So you can have compassion and still have to flop some upside the head once in a while, but do it compassionately. Wonderful. So I'll leave you all folks with that for today. I want to thank you all for your participation and your insights and your questions. Please have yourselves a wonderful rest of your meeting, a great day, and please look forward to my email. And as well, if you have any questions for me, never hesitate. I'm here for you all the time.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was excellent. Really, really good. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you very much. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to log off. I wish you all a fond farewell.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, that was really, really great. It left me with a lot of things to think about and to start planning. Does anybody have anything that they wanted to share that has been going on in their programming right now? This is meeting number 4 for us.
I don't really have something to share at this point. Can you all hear me? I'm not too sure. Okay, perfect. So my name is Connie. I just started 4 weeks ago with FCSS in Lac La Biche. I'm the new outreach worker for the age group 7 to 12 years of age. This is my second meeting here with you all. I really enjoyed the last time and I'm looking forward to hearing new things today. I just wanted to introduce myself to the group and I will pop my email address into the chat box. I'm still looking for ideas since I'm new at this year right now and creating so much, hoping to create new programs. I like to get input if anybody has ideas or running programs already, which are going well. I really would like to see if you could share those ones with me. Thank you.
What age group did you say again you were working with?
7 till 12.
7 to 12. And are you doing in-school programming or out-of-school programming?
Out of school programming at this point. So I'm only 21 hours at this point. I already run a group which is called Junior Family Fun Nights.
Okay.
This is family orientated, especially for families with kids in the age group between 7 and 12, but older and younger siblings are of course welcome as well, since it's a family activity. I run that twice a month at this point on Zoom. And I have for tonight's session 26 families joining in our community. I prepare usually activity packs before we meet on Zoom. We do a couple activities together. We have table topics where the family can talk about certain things, and I explain usually the idea of the activity, and then it's more like a self-paced program, and then each family sits for themselves doing the activity actually.
Okay.
Yeah, we do get great response for that, and families like to share their pictures during the process, the outcome. So it's actually really neat. But I'm looking as well into starting coming in May, doing a couple youth groups, a junior group and a tween group. I like to split the age between 7 and 9 and 10 and 12.
Right.
I feel like between 7 and 12, the interests are very, very different. And I don't want to have frustrated older kids because they're bored, and frustrated younger kids because it's too hard maybe for them to do that activity I'm planning. So I like to split that age group into two. And yeah, I would like to run or start to run once a month, a junior group and a tween group. And yeah, this is only as far as I got.
There's some great resources from the One Circle Foundation. My FCSS office, I run a girls circle and a boys council, and there's quite a few different workbooks. Like I probably have 8 or so different programs from One Circle Foundation, and there's some really, really great information there for the girls circle and boys council for those groups.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else have anything they'd like to add? I'll give you guys another update on how my programming has been going. So I'm still doing virtual programming during school hours into the classrooms. And this is our 4th month, so I'm about 4 months into it now. Yeah, 4 months. And my feedback is it's been challenging to get my outcomes. Doing everything virtually. That has been my biggest challenge, is to get the teachers to email me back the outcomes, the post-test from the students and from themselves. But I finally tracked about 90% of them down. And I have to say that I'm really happy with the surveys that have come back. Everybody has really been enjoying the format and the way that we've been doing it. Of course, everybody misses the one-on-one, but it has been going really well online. And I know I said this last month, and I'm going to say it again. I almost feel like because our kids are younger and they're more used to this than we are, I almost feel like they're listening more, they're getting it more. Like, it's just, I don't know, being on the computer, looking at their little faces in these little squares just seems to be a little bit more interactive than it did sometimes in the classroom. And I know that maybe makes me sound like I was super boring in the classroom, but it's just a totally different dynamic. I am quite enjoying it. So that's where I'm at right now. Anybody else?
James Everett again here, sorry, with the Hinton Youth Center. I was just wondering if anybody's kind of figured out any alternative ways to do indoor gatherings with the youth, or if we're still strictly outdoor. So lately for programming, I usually do a couple virtual programs every week, and then I'll do curbside hangouts up to 10 people. And I'll either bring an Xbox and a TV out, or we'll have like lawn games or board games, and then some snacks and some coffee, and we'll just hang out outside under the tent or whatnot. But that's not the most reliable with the weather and the mountains and whatnot. So, but yeah, just programming wise, are we still strictly pretty much internet and outdoors?
Hi, I'm Emma Murray from Vegreville and District FCSS. Our FCSS has been doing in-person programming for all of our after-school programs since January. We just had to get approval through AHS and follow the guidelines, but we are considered a mental health and resiliency program. So they did give us the go-ahead to do that. We just limited our numbers to 10 students for each program, and then just followed the guidelines like masks, try to keep it 2 meters apart at all times. Luckily, our area is big enough that we can do that, and we're still able to be indoors and do all our normal activities, which is really awesome.
How many programs do you run then, Emma?
We have a program on Mondays for K-3 kids, a program on Tuesdays for grades 4 to 6, and then Wednesdays and Thursdays we have our grade 7s to grade 12s. But on Wednesdays we have like our Catholic school, and then on Thursdays we have our public school. And so we keep those schools separated.
Are your programs full then?
Yep, they filled up like halfway through the first day that we opened them. And we're running the younger kids, so elementary school programs. We're just doing them in 8-week intervals so we can get different groups of kids in every 8 weeks.
Right.
Just to open that up more.
And so which programs are you running then?
All of them. So it's just an after school program where we provide them like a prepackaged snack. We have a lesson for elementary school kids. It's more on like how to be a good friend and just those really good personal lessons they need to learn. And then for our high school kids, we do a lot of mental health talks and just coping skills for the pandemic. And then some other topics like April, we're talking about social media and how that affects our mental health and that kind of thing. But it switches every month.
Awesome. Excellent. Thank you.
And sorry, just to clarify, you guys aren't attached to a school or anything or a church?
Nope. No,
Yeah,
we're just.
We've reached out to the Alberta Health Services, but they said that they haven't really heard of any people allowing that sort of thing. So we service ages 13 to 18, and we are an after-school drop-in program, but we do require registration. But yeah, we've been trying to figure out how to get a couple youths in there, but we've been told we're just allowed one-on-ones. So
Yeah, because sorry.
No, we'll just have to look into that more, I guess.
Yeah, we made sure to point out that like it's all mental health programming for our high school kids. For our elementary school kids, they said that we automatically qualify under the daycare umbrella, so that's why we're allowed to run with the elementary schools. But the high schools, it's because it's a support group style that focuses on mental health, and that's how they got us approved.
Okay, cool. Thank you for your help.
Yeah.
My name's sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Mickey.
My name is Mickey Wilson. I'm with Riley FCSS. I actually just started last Monday as the director. We're small, so I am the only person at this point. And we are the ones who started the Beaver County LGBTQ2S adult support group on a monthly basis. And we also are meeting in person, and we had to document for Alberta Health Services what we're doing and keep records. But because we're a support group, if it's a support group, you're allowed to meet in person up to certain amounts of people as long as you meet the protocols that AHS requires. We're going to be doing some youth stuff in the spring and summer, particularly in association with the library. But we're just getting off the ground. I was involved in the transition from the tri-municipality agreement to Riley's own program. So I'm not brand new. I kind of developed their transition plan and then applied for the job, and here I am. So we're hoping to have some youth stuff to be able to share in the not too distant future. I came across this meeting by accident, so I'm glad to be here and look forward to meeting in the future.
Thank you. Jenna, did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, I was just really curious because we had reached out. So I'm Jenna with Yellowhead County FCSS. We have reached out to a local public health inspector, and we're kind of given the information that they could not give us approvals to run said program. So I'm just curious, like, are people calling like 811 to get these approvals and permissions? Yeah, because we're just like, we're kind of in that situation too, where we're being told like no indoor programming. So we're sticking to like the virtual I've been able to do some in-school programming, but not the typical. So yeah, I'm just curious to hear how are people getting these approvals?
Hi, it's Christine Martin here from Laklabish. I know I shared once before, so I apologize for people that heard me already, but we did reach out to our local Alberta Health Services person, and the only thing we're allowed to run are youth programs where they get a certificate. So babysitting, home alone, and I do a class 7 learners course as well. I don't know what the difference is between a certificate and not a certificate, but that's where we ended up with talks with them, with our municipality. And of course, we can only have 9 kids plus myself, and then social distancing and all that kind of thing.
So I'll share what we did. So I went into the AHS orders, and support groups have always been permitted to meet. So it doesn't specify whether they're adult or youth or anything else. And so we just went ahead and planned to meet in person with all the what we assumed the protocols would be. And somebody, of course, reported us. And we spoke to the local inspector, and he believed, of course, the response was because we had an issue with a local restaurant, and homophobia combined were probably the reason it was reported. But he just sent me the document to fill out and said we need to obey the required protocols. And so we just assumed, because support groups are permitted, that we could go ahead. And because if you go into the latest Chief Officer of Health order, it's under 43I that support groups are permitted. And we just did it. And then when somebody reported us, of course, I was sent the document that I have to fill out. And it's not really the document didn't seem real appropriate. They sent me a plan for relaunch document. I'd be happy to send it to someone who could distribute it if they like. And I just had to keep a record of, how people are entering and how they're being seated. And, if they're seated, they don't wear a mask because we keep them 6-7 feet apart, I think it is. And unless they're getting up to have to use the washroom, we don't allow refreshments right now, just bottled water, because it sits in the center of every table and everybody has their own. So that's kind of what we did. We just went ahead and did it, and because it's a support group, it's allowed.
Emma put in the chat that she emailed community.engagement@ahs.ca, and that way they have written proof that AHS had approved their programming. Could look into that as well. Melissa says they can share the documents if you want to send them to her email. Saffron Center presented.
I guess the follow-up question too would be, what type of programming are you offering that would fit under the support group category? If anyone has any feedback on that, that'd be awesome.
So Jenna asked if she wanted to know what kind of programming everybody's offering that is considered support group programming. What programs are you offering?
So here in Beaver County, it is a support group. It's to reduce our reason d'etre, so to speak, is to reduce isolation, to create connection, belonging, and support, and reduce mental health issues, and suicide, those kinds of things. So, mental health, as I think it was Emma who said earlier, would likely be the key component to ensuring that you meet any criteria, I would think.
Yeah. Did you want to try speaking again, Astrid? I don't think it is working. Quite honestly, I would think that a lot of our programming that we're offering right now should fall under the umbrella of support groups anyways, really. Okay. Any final thoughts?
I've been listening and I think that across the province, we've been struggling here in Swan Hills. We've got a small community, but we just don't have any guidance as to how to move forward. And I wish that we did from contract holders. It's not I mean, we can make our own local decisions, but when I've contacted AHS, they just keep telling me to go with your municipality and your policies through your municipality and stuff. And if we're the only programs under them that run these kind of programs, so they don't have any guidance for us either. So it is really a guessing game with all of it. And I feel like I'm not alone there. I wish that there was some strict, this is what you need to do for all of your programming, because this has been a challenge for the whole last year. And I think that it's going to be continued until this is rectified. So
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that everybody kind of feels that way, that there's no concrete anything for us to follow. And it's just so challenging.
it's frustrating too, because when we make a decision locally and then a bigger community down the road is doing something different, then people are coming back to us and constantly saying, well, they're doing it, why aren't you doing it? Or you know, so they're leaving it all up to an individual basis, but I think that can be damaging too. So.
Well, and it is because it seems like a lot of the documents, like on Alberta Health Services, like sometimes it seems like the wording is up to interpretation. So, I mean, that in itself is frustrating, right? Like you and I could read a document completely different. And I know we struggled with this at the rec department last summer, trying to figure out, well, what exactly does that mean? Right?
I think for us, it's just, we are so rural and we have very, very little programs. And then when you only have 2 or 3 people that are offering programs in the area, and one of the groups decides that, you know what, putting on basketball tournaments for youth or doing bingos and stuff, that's all okay because Alberta Health Services has said it is, but yet we can't run any programs at all. It really does change the rules, like you said, Trina, for everybody. It's like one thing's okay, the next thing isn't, but yet, you know, we need the services. It's tough.
I think the best service for everybody right now would be if we could have ventilators and hazmat suits and just go around giving hugs, because that's what everybody needs right now.
I agree. Everybody just needs some love. Yeah, for sure.
I guess I would also be curious to know, with summer coming up, do other programs offer traditional summer programs like summer camps or anything like that, and how you're planning for those different possibilities? I'm hearing obviously some communities are able to do some in-person. Right now, we're kind of planning for outdoor with the possibility of some indoor gatherings happening, possibly virtual, possible like camps in a kit. It's just like trying to prepare for all of these different scenarios. So I'm curious of what other programs have on the go, if any.
Jenna, we're in the exact same boat, trying to plan 3 different scenarios just in case, our best hope, and then, working our way down from there.
For myself, Jenna, I'm planning doing a life skills kind of a day camp format, 3 days a week, or a 3-day day camp format. Hopefully in person with the minimum with the maximum kids that I'm allowed, if we're allowed to be inside. Quite honestly, at this point, I don't really have a plan B, because if I can't be in person, I'm not sure if I can run this program effectively online. So again, everything is just kind of up in the air.
Amanda, I did the same thing. Like, I set up the Life Skills Youth Summer Camp in 2 different places, like 2 different communities.
Yep.
And I pre-booked everybody for Zoom and in person, and just hoping for the best, because I don't want to wait till last minute. So I booked the halls and stuff, and just in hopes that it actually can happen.
Yeah, I've done the same thing, Sandra. I emailed them a couple weeks ago to make sure that we had the halls, and I don't know. I know last summer when I was over at the rec department, we were able to do in-person stuff with the kids. So I'm hoping that we can still, I'm hoping we can still do it. I really am.
We're looking at outdoor programming here. We've also booked our curling rink because it has a big end door that can be opened to provide ventilation, and it's got enough space to keep people distance if the weather is inclement or anything like that. So most curling rinks have a great big door that opens, and so that's what we chose as a rainy day option.
I think the hardest thing for us all is to not get so frustrated in the frustration of this all. Yeah, that's a really good idea, using the curling rink and having that big door. Okay, Alex said that she's running 2 programs out of her rec department in Grand Cache. And she's allowed to do this because the programs are educational, and she has her limit of 8 youth following the COVID rules. So that's good. Really good. Okay. Any final comments, guys? Yeah, it does feel a little bit heavy, and hugs to everybody too. This is going to be our last youth programming session for a little while. I want to thank everybody for coming. It was phenomenal to have everybody here. We really enjoyed it. I'm so excited to have the turnout that we did and the response that we did to this. And we'll see what happens in the future. Maybe we'll continue on with these. And yeah, it was really great to hear from other programmers and to hear what everybody's doing. Oh, that's good, Tanya. Excellent. I've done Y-Try twice, and I've been doing it online as well. I love it. Awesome. All right, Melissa.
Thank you so much. Excuse me. Thank you so much, Amanda. I've got some yard work going on behind me, so you might hear that. I apologize. But thank you so much to you, Lisa, Greenview, FCSS, for all you've done to host these sessions. We really appreciate it. We'll take a break and then maybe come back later in the summer if you want to start planning for fall. If anyone has any other ideas, please let me know. We're totally open to hosting sessions that make the most sense for programs. As the association, that's what we're here to do, support you guys. So just let us know. And thank you so much. Hang in there. You're all doing amazing work. I get so much inspiration from hearing what everyone is doing, and I really appreciate it. As soon as I get those slides and information from Mike, I'll send that out. And yeah, have a great day. Have a great week.
Thanks, Melissa. I just want to add that with everything that we are doing, guys, is so important. And I know we're all frustrated. I'm not going to cry. I know we're all frustrated, and I know that we just want this to be over, but everything that you guys are doing is so important, and people appreciate it. Even though it feels like sometimes we're banging our head against the wall and we're not getting through, we have gotten through to people. They appreciate it. So just keep going. Okay, thank you so much.
Great point, Amanda. You all make such a big difference in your communities and the province. Thank you. Take care, everyone. Bye.